Hi, everybody. This is Bob Gale, co-creator of Back to the Future, and you're listening to Brad Gilmore.
Doc! Okay, relax, Doc. It's me. It's Marty.
No, it can't be. Just sent you back to the future.
Yeah. Oh, I know you did send me back to the future, but I'm back. I'm back from the future.
Great Scott.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
The way I see it, if you're gonna build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
Whoa, this is heavy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast, the only podcast looking back in time to the greatest film trilogy of all time, Back to the Future. I am your friend in time, Brad Gilmore, the author of Why We Love Back to the Future, 40 years of flux capacitor. 40 years of fandom, flux capacitors, and timeless adventures, available wherever books are sold. If you want to go grab a copy on Amazon, you can keep us on the charts over there. We hit number 1 in our category, which I was incredibly thankful for. So make sure that you continue to do that. What I wanted to do today, this is a kind of a cool thing, I guess, for everyone to check out, because I kind of, for my day job in radio and television, I do a lot of celebrity interviews, as I'm sure y'all remember from this podcast. It's how I got a lot of the great guests from the Back to the Future world on here. And normally you do these things in like media tours, right? Start off, I was doing a lot of radio tours. Now I do a lot of junkets, and I do, less radio tours than I used to, but I still love the radio format. Obviously the podcast format, love those kind of interviews where you're just listening and it brings people in. So anyway, for this book, I was not the interviewer, but the interviewee. And I got to do a radio tour where I talked to people all over the country. And it was an interesting format. Again, I've always been on one side of it, so it's kind of cool to see the other side of it and be the subject instead of the subjected. or be the subject instead of the interviewer would probably be a better way to say it. And so what I was able to do, I was able to get some audio from some of those interviews that I did and kind of compile them, so you could kind of hear conversations with what people maybe who aren't as, some of them are, some of them aren't, nerdy about Back to the Future as we are. You can kind of go and hear from different radio hosts from around the country, and we just engage in casual conversations about Back to the Future. So I hope you enjoy this radio tour. I got on the DeLorean. I went all across the nation to talk about why we love Back to the Future. The audio quality is up and down depending on the station I was talking to. The last interview, their audio is really quiet. I tried to bring it up as much as I could. I was having difficulty doing it. So just bear with me on that last one. But here we go. Let's get ready for this ride through time, this radio ride through time here on Back to the Future.
How are you, my man?
How are you?
We're talking. Is the full name of the book is Why We Love Back to the Future? 40 Years of Fandom, Flux Capacitors, and Timeless Adventures.
That's the one, man. That's the one, Vinny.
I love it. I just met Doc Brown for the first time, Christopher Lloyd, at a con, and many years back, I was fortunate enough to have right here in this studio with me Michael J. Fox himself, and I geeked out. It was kind of, I totally geeked out.
What's crazy, Vinny, is in the book, I actually I've had the opportunity to interview Chris Lloyd before, but never in person. And last year, kind of set my love back for Back to the Future, although it never left. But one of the things that did it was they were here in Houston at a con called Comic Palooza. I went ahead and wanted to go meet them. And then that was just such a exhilarating experience for me. I was like, you know what? I need to go back and I need to get this book out to the people.
Oh, yeah, I can't wait to check it out. I'm hoping it arrives today or tomorrow. Before we even get into the book, too, you got to be a huge fan. As Brad Gilmore wrote a book about loving Back to the Future, 40 years of fandom, and it is true. I remember the night I went to the theater and caught that movie. I was a high school senior. I was senior year and leaving and knowing I just saw something really special. Just everything from Huey Lewis's tune to the skateboarding. It's just magical. But let me ask you this. There's all this rumor going around about a prequel series or that, and Michael J. Fox may produce. Do you know anything about that?
So, look, there's been rumors for years that there's going to be some continuation of the story. They're going to do a Back to the Future 4. The guys from Cobra Kai, have an idea of to kind of adapt it to a Netflix version or a short, series of some kind, limited series. But Bob and Bob, that's Robert Zemeckis, the director, and Bob Gale, the co-creator and writer, they have literally said over their dead bodies, this will not happen. They think that the story is perfect as it is. As a fan of Back to the Future and the universe and the lore of it, would I like to see something new? Yeah, I would like to see something. But if we only get those 3 movies, the animated series, the game, the musical, I can live with that. But it would be interesting to see how they would kind of dive back into it.
Yeah, I love hearing you say that, too. My daughter caught the musical actually in London. She was doing a semester abroad. I'm seeing the musical here in Connecticut in just a couple of weeks, Back to the Future, the musical, which is, has been getting rave reviews. Now, let me ask you this. So, I'm pretty good. I'm not great. Whenever I know my stuff, I know my movies, I know about Eric Stoltz. You're not going to get me there, Brad. I know a lot of trivia about Back to the Future. Do you think you have something that I might not know?
Well, there's plenty in the book that I think would come to a surprise to some people. But let me ask you this. Let me test your trivia here, Vinny. Do you know the original name of the movie?
Yeah. I did. No, you got me right out of the gate. How bad is that? Back to the Future is such a great name, too. No, well, maybe it'll ring a bell when you say it. What is it?
Well, so the producer at Universal at the time, his name was Sid Sheinberg. They were talking about the title of the movie. This guy had some good ideas, right? He said, look, you should call him Doc Brown instead of Professor Brown. It shouldn't be the Springtime in Paris dance, maybe Enchantment Under the Sea. You shouldn't call her Eileen. You should call her Lorraine. These are all studio notes. Doc shouldn't have a pet chimp named Shimp. He should have a dog. Name him Einstein. These are studio notes that Sid Sheinberg was giving out. But the one that he had, he goes, look, I know y'all are thinking about calling this movie Back to the Future. That title makes no sense. It is not a good title. How can you go back to the future? It doesn't make sense to me. The perfect name for this movie that will make it stand out above the rest and be a summer blockbuster hit, you should name this movie Spaceman from Pluto. And he was serious as a heart attack. That was what he said. The executive of the studio should be the name of the movie. And thankfully, Steven Spielberg, he wrote him a note back saying, oh, we really appreciate your joke and your sense of humor. It's kept us all, in good spirits on set. And they never heard from Sid Sheinberg again. But years later, Eli Roth, who's a director, he had a movie called A House with a Clock in Its Walls starring Jack Black. And there's a scene where a bus is passing a movie theater, and on the marquee is Spaceman from Pluto. So it was like a little nod to the title that never was.
That was the day and age of Buckaroo Banzai and, Howard the Duck. But that's the kind of stuff that can kill a movie. You know what I always wondered about Back to the Future, too, is I was a huge fan of Elizabeth, his girlfriend in the first one. I'm trying to think.
Claudia Wells. Claudia Wells.
Oh, that's right. It goes the other way. That was the interesting thing. The girl... for the sequel to have the Karate Kid's girlfriend, this future Oscar nominee in a role, I was stunned by that, I remember at the time. And she didn't even have a huge role. I'm like, how did they get Elizabeth Shue and why? And the story that I was told back then is not the story that's being told now by the original actress, Claudia Wells. She's out being very vocal nowadays, saying... what was it? What did she say now? That she had another movie she was doing or something? That was an odd switcheroo. It's kind of like Darren from Bewitched.
Well, so actually, from Claudia, and I've gotten to know Claudia over the last several years. Great woman. Her mother had fallen ill. Her mother fell ill, while they were ramping up for the sequel, and she said, I just can't, in good conscience, leave my mother's side. And so then they recast the role. What's interesting is Claudia Wells had a kind of a tumultuous time in Back to the Future, I guess is one way you could say it. She was cast, and then she had a series. This is in the original movie. She had a series get picked up by ABC called Off the Rack, so she had to pull out of Back to the Future. They recast Jennifer Parker with Melora Hardin. So as Melora Hardin and Eric Stoltz were the stars of Back to the Future, and then when they let go of Eric after 6-8 weeks of shooting, Melora Hardin was too tall for Michael J. Fox, so they had to let her go, and then by that time, Claudia Wells was able to do it again. So that's how she got into the first movie. And then the second one, I think that they get Elizabeth Shue just because Back to the Future was the biggest movie in 1985. So the sequel was going to be huge. So even a small role is a big role in a movie like that.
Yeah, that's well said. That's why he wrote the book, Why We Love Back to the Future. Timeless adventures. You know, I sat in the studio with Michael J. Fox, and he was saying how the Eric Stoltz was making this movie down the street, and he was dressed up as a werewolf, and he felt silly, and he was very frustrated by that. I read him the riot act, Brad. I'm like, you can't diss Teen Wolf in here, and you do all the time. I go, you did in your book, and he was laughing about it. He goes, yeah, I think I do underestimate. I'm like, people love Teen Wolf, but you've probably seen Michael J. Fox in print before making comments that he wanted in on this movie being made a couple of blocks over, and then boom, he got the call. He went in.
Yeah, you know, and I think he referred to it as wolf drag, is what he said. He was dressed in wolf drag, and that was his characterization in his book of it. And yeah, I mean, and then you know, when you're doing that, and Teen Wolf is great. I love Teen Wolf, but respectfully to Teen Wolf,
of a movie.
But respectful to Teen Wolf, it's no Back to the Future. I mean, if you could have your druthers, you're going Back to the Future 10 times out of 10.
Yeah. So what else? What can people get in Why We Love Back to the Future outside of, I'm assuming, timeline? And all three? Are you hitting all three movies? Or since it says 40 years of fandom, is your book focused on the original?
So no, it goes through. We do the entire trilogy. We talk about each of them. We even talk about some of the scenes that hit the cutting room floor that maybe should have been left in the movie. There's an entire chapter about a cut scene from Back to the Future 2. We talk about the animated series, the theme park ride, even the musical, which I've been privileged to see. We really go in depth with this. And I've had a Back to the Future podcast for the last 10 years where I've talked to Bob Gale, Christopher Lloyd, Crispin Glover, Harry Waters Jr., who actually writes the introduction, who played Marvin Berry, Leah Thompson, so many people involved with the film series, and a lot of those little cool anecdotes that I found out firsthand, they're also in the book. So it's the entire universe of Back to the Future is featured in Why We Love Back to the Future.
Yeah, so I want people to grab it. It's in bookstores now. It came out this week, May 6th. I don't know how you did a podcast for 10 years. I don't know how you got that much material from, there's a universe, and I am a huge fan of it, but 10 years of a podcast on it, that's a lot of hard work, man. That's a lot of research, I would imagine.
A lot of research, but you know what? This book was 10 years in the making, really, for me, really a lifetime in the making, and I'm just really happy for people to check it out.
And I'm one of them. Brad Gilmore, thanks so much for taking the time, and good luck. I hope sales are great for the book.
Hey, I appreciate it, Vinny, and I will see you in the future.
Why We Love Back to the Future, 40 years of fandom, flux capacitors, and timeless adventures. Our guest, Brad Gilmore. Hey, Brad, why do we love Back to the Future? I can't believe it's been 40 years, yeah?
It's been 40 years since that fateful day on July the 3rd of 1985 when movie audiences first flocked to see this Robert Zemeckis picture, Steven Spielberg Presents, co-written and created by Bob Gale. Look, people love Back to the Future because it's one of those, it literally, I guess the pun is in there because it's in the book, it's a timeless story. It's a generational story. Everybody can actually sit there and pontificate the question that actually spawned this film, which is, what would it be like to go to high school with your parents? And if you are asked that question, that's going to get your mind going. And then you throw in time travel, a crazy scientist, and all kinds of mishaps and misfortunes. This movie and this story, this trilogy of movies, has just continued to be able to capture everybody for these last 4 decades.
Again, our guest, author Brad Gilmore, Why We Love Back to the Future. Yeah, earlier this morning I played a clip of the day from co-star Leah Thompson. She had no idea making that movie that it was going to be so huge. Did you find that true with most of the cast?
I think so. I mean, obviously, when Steven Spielberg puts his name on something, you think it's going to go, it's going to have obviously a lot of eyes on it. But this movie, it took a while to get it kind of out of production. They had the script for several years before it was greenlit. Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale hadn't really had a huge hit in their career up until this. And then Zemeckis really hit it big with Romancing the Stone. And once he did that, all the movie studios were like, oh, hey, what else you want to do? And he came with Back to the Future. But also think about this is they shoot this movie for 8 weeks with a different actor in the main role, and then they recast and have to reshoot everything. It was kind of a hectic production at times. So I can understand why the vibe on set might have been like, are we doing something good? Like, are people gonna like this movie? But I think when Michael J. Fox came on and it came out in the summer, you saw this thing is going to have some massive legs. Now, did they think it was going to be 4 decades of people talking about this movie and somebody like me wanting to spend hours upon hours and years of his life writing a book about it? I don't know, but I think that once it came out, you saw how fantastic it was.
And Michael J. Fox wasn't the first choice to play the lead, right?
So he was the first choice, but he wasn't available. He was doing Family Ties at the time. Alex Keaton, he's the biggest star in television. It's the biggest show in television. And Gary Goldberg, the producer, said, he's just not available. Family Ties is priority. So they cast Eric Stoltz, who's a fine actor. Eric Stoltz had done several things. He's done several things since. And they shoot with him for 8 weeks on this movie. They were getting to the point of the film where they were saying like, all right, guys, what are you working on next? Like, what do you have lined up? And then one fateful evening, they said, look, we're just not getting the jokes that we want in the movie. The movie's not funny. It feels real dark with Eric as the lead. So Bob and Steven Spielberg made the decision to pull the plug on Eric Stoltz and recast Marty McFly as Michael J. Fox, meaning, though, that Michael J. Fox had to film Family Ties during the day and film Back to the Future at night. But he was willing to do it, and obviously it was the right decision.
Wow. Eric Stoltz, the Pete Best of Back to the Future. That's the second Pete Best joke I've done this morning. That's a long shot, but the Beatles fans get it. Well, it's fascinating. It would make a great Mother's Day gift. Moms love, they grew up with it. Brad Gilmore, why we love Back to the Future. Congratulations, and come back to the future and the Johnny Rock Show soon, okay?
Hey, Johnny, anytime, man. I really appreciate your time.
Love ya. Good, John.
Hey, welcome back to the Monsters Mornings. We're Radio 104.1, broadcasting live on iHeartRadio. What's up, guys? We have a guest on the line, and I want to get to him quickly because I know that he's got limited time. He's doing one of those things where he's calling folks from around the country because, believe it or not, it's 40 years of one of the best movies ever, which is Back to the Future. And we've got on the line with us right now, we've got who's written a book about it. And I thought it'd be really interesting because I know a lot of our listeners probably identify with the movie Back to the Future. How you doing, Brad?
Hey, what's going on, Russ? What's going on, everybody? I'm doing good, man. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, buddy. They send us these things all the time. Like, do you want to talk to this person or that person? And when I saw what your book is about, I'm like, I think for our audience, it kind of fits perfectly because, everybody loves Back to the Future. But what made you want to write a book about it?
Well, man, ever since I first saw the first movie, and then back when I was a young kid, something about it just, to me, is one of those things. You can't really explain it. It was like almost like lightning struck my heart's clock tower, if you will. And I just loved it ever since. And I started doing a podcast about it back in 2015. And next thing you know, we've done 11 seasons of that show. And I just kind of kept thinking about Back to the Future, different theories. What if they did this? How did they do that? And then I said, you know what? Someone should write a book about it. And why the hell not me?
There must be a lot of nuances about Back to the Future that I'm not thinking about, though, because I can't think of a full podcast I would do about it. What is it that we're missing that a lot of us don't realize happened maybe during the movie, or there are things that are super interesting that we don't know about?
Well, I think probably the most fascinating one that the layman may or may not know, but to me, this is an incredible story, is that Michael J. Fox, who is synonymous with Marty McFly, probably the coolest character in the history of cinema, right up there with Indiana Jones and James Bond, in my opinion. He was not originally Marty McFly. Michael J. Fox did not get cast in Back to the Future originally. Originally, that part went to Eric Stoltz, and Eric Stoltz filmed Back to the Future, 8 weeks of production. They were almost finished with it, and then when Robert Zemeckis, the director, and Steven Spielberg sat back and looked at it, they go, this movie isn't working. It's not funny. It doesn't have the charm. We need to recast the main role. So then they had to go back to Michael J. Fox. They asked him, would you do this movie? And he had to film Family Ties during the day and film Back to the Future at night. And that was incredible to me that we could have had a whole different Marty McFly.
Yeah, wasn't that one of the storylines in one of the Marvel movies where they had gone back? I don't know, everything had changed or a different world or whatever, and they're like, "What are you talking about? He's not Marty McFly. It's Eric Stoltz."
Yeah, they do that in the Flash. In the Flash, they have that conversation. Eric Stoltz is Marty McFly. But there's a couple interesting casting choices. Claudia Wells, who originally plays Jennifer Parker in the first Back to the Future, she was recast in the sequels by Elizabeth Shue, but originally Jennifer Parker was played by Melora Hardin. And then when they cast Michael J. Fox, she had to be fired because she was too tall. But these are small things about the making of the movie, but there's so much more. We go into the sequels. We talk about the musical that just came out a few years ago, the animated series, the theme park attraction, deleted scenes from the films and why they may or may not have been good things to cut out or should they have left them in. And there's been so much insight. I've gotten to talk to Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, Bob Gale, Robert Zemeckis, Harry Waters Jr., Don Fullilove, all people who were in the movie, Claudia Wells, like we talked about. I've talked to them over the years, and they've given me so much interesting insight to the making of these movies that I thought, man, there's a lot here that I could compile into this book.
And we interviewed, who's the guy that is the bad guy?
Tom Wilson, Biff Tannen.
Biff, yeah. Yeah. He's been in before. He's a super nice guy, and he seems to still embrace it.
Well, and he should. I think that when you look at the trilogy, I do a whole chapter about the old man Biff, and people can dive into that. But when you look at the movies, he plays 7 different versions, essentially, of the same character over 3 films, and they're each distinctive in their own different ways. And to me, his acting chops, he was throwing 1,000 in the Back to the Future trilogy, and he's a hilarious guy. But to me, he's probably the greatest cinematic villain of all time because he has 0 redeeming qualities. Darth Vader is awesome. Right. Tony Montana is awesome. Any movie villain you can think of, you either understand their pathology or you think they're kind of cool. Biff Tannen, he's just a butthead.
Yeah, he's just a butthead. And you would have thought he would have done a lot more afterwards because you're right. His acting ability, he plays so many different types of characters, but he sort of just, as always, just kind of been Biff, huh?
You know what? Sometimes you hit a role so far out of the park that it just becomes who you are. Even Michael J. Fox, who went on to do a lot of things after Back to the Future. Right. When you say Michael J. Fox, people go, oh, Marty McFly. Christopher Lloyd, who was in another one of my favorite movies, which is Clue, the movie, which also came out in 1985. A lot of people don't realize that Chris Lloyd played a doctor and a professor in the same year because he played Professor Plum. He went on to do a whole bunch of stuff, but still, more than Taxi, more than Roger Rabbit, more than The Addams Family, you think Christopher Lloyd, Doc Brown. It's just how big that movie 100%. Was.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Angel, question for Brad Gilmore, who's written a book. It's Why We Love Back to the Future 40 Years Later.
One of the things I find interesting with this book, or with this series, Brad, is, and I would like your thoughts on it, is the fact that because of this series of movies, all the rules for time travel from this inception of movies going forward was set by Back to the Future.
100%. And you know what's funny is in the Avengers Endgame, which is a time travel movie, Tony Stark's character, or Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr., obviously, he kind of makes fun. He's like, wait a minute, you're basing your entire plan to save the universe on Back to the Future? And the funny thing is, they kind of make it seem like that's not how time travel works. But then in the movie, they go back into other movies and change what happens so that they create a different future. So it's exactly like Back to the Future. And to me, this is what people think of when they think of a time travel story.
That's funny. Yes, Ryan, question for Brad Gilmore.
It's fun because I also really love the Back to the Future series, and they're so iconic for me growing up. And from Industrial Light and Magic doing the original effects, pre-digital, by the way, But my thing was always this, and I don't know if you felt this way too, right? Because Back to the Future 2 takes place in 2015. And I found 2015 to be very disappointing because of that.
Right.
Did you have the same thought? Because when I saw that holographic shark, I'm like, hoverboards, I'm like, I know this is coming 2015. 2015 gets here, and all I have is bad credit score, and I drive a 2012 Hyundai Santa Fe.
Well, first of all, don't knock the Santa Fe. It's a quality automobile. But secondly, when it comes to what they were able to do in 2015, there were some things that did happen, right? We pay with stuff with our thumbprint. We can have a picture-in-picture. There's a lot of different like small little inventions that they came up with that actually did end up panning out. There are holographic cinemas. We saw Tupac at Coachella, and then the year after 2016, they were a year off. The Cubs won the World Series, so they weren't so wrong. But we don't have flying cars, which I don't know how it is where you all live. I live in Houston, Texas, and flying cars with the people and the drivers in this city and state, that is not a good idea. So I think that we're really good here in 2025. But to me, what was great about that 2015 version in Back to the Future was that it was one of the only movies I can remember where they go into the future and it's not some dystopian, distraughten, we're all wearing silver suits and no one has any money. Like it was like, hey, here's a hopeful version of what the future could look like.
Hey, that first weekend that it came out, I can't really remember. I know it ended up being a blockbuster, but was it really big the first weekend that Back to the Future came out?
Yeah, July 3rd, 1985, essentially, it dominated the entire year. It was the highest grossing movie of 1985. It was number one for 13, 14 weeks in the theaters, which nowadays, if a movie's number one 2 weeks in a row, it's considered a massive success. So imagine dominating the entire summer into the early fall. Yeah, it was the biggest movie of 1985. And what's also interesting is until they saw the success of Back to the Future, they had no plans in making a 2 or a 3. That's not what they thought back then. They were just like, let's make a really good movie. And a lot of people seem to remember it saying to be continued at the end of the film. That wasn't added until the home video release, and they knew they were going to do the sequel. It was meant to be a standalone film, but the success said, you know what, the people want more of this.
Hey, I know Michael J. Fox was on Family Ties at the time, but was Family Ties super popular? Because I remember watching it, but I can't remember if it was like super popular then, or if it popularity got bigger after Back to the Future.
So I think it's, it kind of goes both ways, but it was super popular. And by the time Back to the Future was the number one movie in the theaters, Family Ties was the number one situational comedy of its day. And so I think that they kind of fed into one another. But it was so big that's why the producer, Gary Goldberg, originally wouldn't let Michael J. Fox off of the set to go do Back to the Future, because he was like, this show is so large, it's so massive, it's making so much money, we can't risk losing you from half the season. And that's why Michael J. Fox had to pull double duty.
Yeah, he was one of the biggest stars of that year for sure. Yeah, Ryan, question for Brad Gilmore.
Brad, I'm looking at photos of you as we're talking to you and whatnot, and you're a very well dapper dressed man. You live in Texas, got a cool little background. It looks like there. My question for you is this, though. When it comes to love, could you be with somebody who did not like the Back to the Future series?
Well, that's a great question, but the answer to it is very simple. There is no one on the face of God's green earth or any known universe or anywhere in the space-time continuum that doesn't love Back to the Future. I haven't met him yet. So the power of love will be strong with anybody and everybody, because we all can celebrate the greatest film trilogy of all time, Back to the Future. And if they haven't seen it yet, that's actually my favorite thing. If I meet somebody who hasn't seen Back to the Future, which is a rarity, but if they haven't, it's the best time of my life. I'm like, we're going to go watch it. Let's make plans. You're coming over tonight. We're going to go on this wild ride.
How many times have you seen it?
So I've thought about this. It definitely, for the first movie, I mean, and this is not an exaggeration, it's probably in the hundreds somewhere. For the sequels, a little bit lower than that, probably several dozen, but this was religion. I mean, if I'm feeling really good and I just want to kill some time, hey, let's throw on Back to the Future. If I'm feeling down, let's throw on Back to the Future. And then when I'm writing this book, you end up watching the movie in a different way. I found myself looking at the background a lot more and like really listening to the dialogue and trying to figure out where they set things and like, oh, there's a hidden Easter egg. Oh, look, there's Lone Pine Mall, but it's Twin Pines Mall in the future and things like that. Like, this is such a rewatchable film, which I think also has lent itself to why it's been around for these 4 decades and always been relevant.
Hey, was Huey Lewis in the News always set to do the music for it, or was that a last minute add-in?
No, yeah, I mean, Sports had come out in '84, I believe, and it was huge. Obviously, Huey Lewis was big back then. If you remember the '80s,
they were the biggest band in the world at the time.
Yeah, at the time they were huge. Yeah,
huge. And to me, back then in the '80s. A lot of movies, you think of Beverly Hills Cop or another favorite of mine that came out in '85, Fletch. A lot of them had like these synth soundtracks, Axel F., the Faltermeyer scores or what have you. What was great about Back to the Future, it had that classic cinematic feel with Alan Silvestri's score, but then some great rock and roll in there with the soundtrack. And really, music is such a big part of Back to the Future because The Power of Love doesn't really have to do with time travel or anything like that. I think it's one of the few iconic movie songs that can be played in other movies and commercials. It's kind of transcended the film in a lot of ways, but you also have Johnny B. Good in there. You have Earth Angel in there. You have Back in Time in there. It's a very musical kind of film, Back to the Future is, and people don't think about that enough. But Huey Lewis, man, that Power of Love to this day, it still rings off.
It's pretty damn good. So, believe it or not, we have a wide range of an audience. I mean, like very wide range. And there are several people texting us right now saying, "I've never seen Back to the Future." Can you imagine? And what do you say to someone who's like 24 years old and never seen Back to the Future? Why would they watch such an old movie?
Well, first I would tell them, look, congratulations, because you're about to see the greatest movie ever made, and you can only experience that once. Everyone remembers their first time, and that's what they're going to remember when they watch the movie. And to me, what's great about it is it's not just an old movie. Yes, it's 40 years old. Yes, we've established that, but the movie is generational. I'm the youngest of 4. My brother and I are 23 years apart, right? That's a pretty good age gap. He was old enough to beat my father. And what's great about this is Back to the Future has been a cultural touchstone for us because everybody can relate to that idea. What was it like to go to high school with your parents? And if you just say that is really the premise of the movie, because this is how the movie came about. Bob Gale found his father's yearbook and didn't know his dad was the president of his graduating class and thought, what would it be like if I went to school with my parents? And found out my dad was like a nerd and I didn't want anything to do with him. That is where the genesis of this movie came from. And if you think about that premise, that question, you can understand why this movie is great. So congratulations again to your audience who has not seen Back to the Future. They're going to remember their first time. It's prom night tonight, baby.
The book is called Why We Love Back to the Future, 40 Years of Fandom, Flux Capacitors, and Timeless Adventures, and it's out on paperback right now. Brad, thank you for taking time to talk to us. I know you also have a connection with professional wrestling, don't you?
Yeah, me and Booker T, my man Booker T, we've been doing it for 12 years together, doing a reality wrestling, our promotion down here in Houston, and a radio show on ESPN, ESPN Radio, the Hall of Fame. So yeah, pro wrestling, Back to the Future, 80s movies, I love it all.
True or false, is Hollywood Haley J in your area right now?
Hollywood Haley J, yes. Hollywood Haley J lives like a couple blocks away from me, actually. Love Haley. She just came down to reality wrestling. Great, great girl.
Yeah, she moved to Texas to do that.
Oh yeah, because we kicked her out of Florida.
Yeah. Well, she had a battle with one of the girls that is on our show, Amber Nova, and just recently lost the title to Amber Nova. But listen, buddy, thank you for taking time to talk to us, Brad. We appreciate it, and good luck with the book.
Hey, thanks, y'all. I really appreciate y'all.
You got it, man. Take care. All right, we'll come back. It's time for the King of Denmark, Ryan Holmes, to make his daily proclamation. You're listening to the Monsters of the Morning.
Thank you for listening to the John and Heidi Show. Excited to visit right now with Brad Gilmore, and we're going to talk about why we love Back to the Future so much, because he's got a book out. It's called Why We Love Back to the Future, 40 Years from Fandom, Flux Capacitors, and Timeless Adventures. And I am a huge fan of the movie, and I am so excited to check out this book. I can't believe it's been 40 years, Brad.
4 decades of dominance for Back to the Future. July 3rd, 1985. That's when fans first flocked to see this future fable. And man, it's been one hell of a ride since.
Yeah, and we are 10 years into the future from, when they went to the future and Back to the Future 2. That was 10 years ago. So we are living way, way, way in the future, Brad.
It's weird. It's weird to think about Back to the Future trilogy is now a trilogy of movies about the past because they all are now taking place in the past.
And it's amazing to me how much they got right when they, did Back to the Future 2. And again, that I'm a member of several groups where this gets talked about, a lot. So I have a feeling your book's going to sell well because I know there's a lot of people that are interested in this. What was it that drew you to this, and what made you decide I have to write a book about this?
Well, it's funny that you asked that because when I was young and I first saw the film, it was after its theatrical release, and I was captivated by it instantaneously. My grandfather was born in the 19-teens, my grandmother in the 20s, my father in the 40s, my mother in the 50s, and for some reason, watching this movie, I felt like it gave me a window into like their lifetime, and I was so fascinated with history in the past, and this film just kind of hit on all levels. It's got a romance in it. It's got sci-fi. It's got action. It's got comedy. But really, the root of the story is great because Bob Gale, who co-wrote the film, he found his father's yearbook one day and said, "Man, I wonder what would happen if I." Because they went to the same high school. He was like, I wonder what would happen if I went to high school with my dad at the same time. Would we have been friends? Would I have hated him? Was he a nerd? Would I have been a jerk? And it was that idea that got the ball rolling on creating what I feel is not only the greatest trilogy of all time, but absolutely the greatest 80s movie of all time, and absolutely the greatest time travel story ever told. And so I was always fascinated with it, and I started doing a podcast just talking with friends about Back to the Future. That led me to interviewing so many people from the cast: Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, Christopher Lloyd, Bob Gale, Robert Zemeckis, Jeffrey Weissman, Don Fullilove, who plays Mayor Goldie Wilson, Claudia Wells. I mean, the list goes on, that I thought, man, I want to adapt all these interesting stories and tidbits that I've gotten from the people who did it over the years into some sort of book, and that's where we are now. Why We Love Back to the Future.
I love it. Again, the book, Why We Love Back to the Future, 40 Years of Fandom, Flux Capacitors, and Timeless Adventures. And again, I think the timing on this is perfect because, 40 years ago is when this hit the theaters. And there are people who watched this as a child who now watch this with their children. And the thing that's nice, you can do that. It's a movie that, is a good movie for all ages. That's not the case for every movie that came out in the 80s.
Well, no. What's actually funny is that Back to the Future, the script got rejected by a lot of studios at first because it wasn't raunchy enough. The Fast Times at Ridgemont High, films of that. There's several others that we could list. Kind of a raunchier comedy. This one wasn't raunchy enough. Everybody said you should take it to Disney. Go to Disney. Disney would love this movie. And then Disney read the script and they're like, "Are you crazy? This movie's about incest. The mother falls in love with the son. Are you out of your minds?" And so Disney didn't want to make it either. But finally, Universal decided to give it a go.
And again, I was saying earlier, I'm in several Facebook groups that are Back to the Future fans. And there are people who watch the movie and they point out, oh, this little thing or that little thing. And some of that stuff, those are things that I've noticed. But I think at the end of the day, it's not a perfect movie. But boy, it's pretty darn close, isn't it?
No, I mean, I would say it's perfect. I would say it's perfect narratively. Narratively and execution is perfect. Yeah, there might be small things where, hey, is that really Eric Stoltz's fist? Or, oh, look, there's Biff's stunt double there in the car instead of him. There's all those small little things. But as far as a narrative and execution and a script, this script is so good that they teach it in screenwriting school. They go, this is how you write a script. This is how you set up things. Here's exposition. Here's payoff. This is how you should construct your 3-act structure. I mean, it is a beautifully written script. And so I would say it's, who else says it's a perfect movie? Quentin Tarantino. Quentin Tarantino says Back to the Future is a perfect movie. So I'm going to go with Quentin on that one.
I agree. And the thing that I will say is really fun, when they did the first one, they didn't even know they were going to be doing the sequels, but it almost felt as though they did. There was so much setup that perfectly played out in 2 and 3. Again, it is my favorite trilogy of all time. And again, I love the fact that you wrote a book on this. And thank you for taking the time to chat with me about it today.
Hey, no problem at all. And, we go into the whole thing. We talk about the sequels. We talk about the musical, the animated series, the theme park ride, the fan theories. So it's a book for you. You will love this.
I'm excited. Brad Gilmore has been our guest today. Brad, thanks for your time, sir.
Hey, thank you so much, man.
Absolutely. Again, the book is called Why We Love Back to the Future, 40 Years of Fandom, Flux Capacitors, and Timeless Adventures. I'll do that last piece. And Timeless Adventures. You can find it right now. It's available, and I've got a link to it in the show notes for today.
I'd like to welcome everyone to the Frank McKay Show. Frank McKay here with the one and only Brad Gilmore. And he does so many things, and he does so many things well. He's a musician, television host, radio personality, and once in a while does a little acting. But the latest from him is Why We Love Back to the Future, 40 Years of Fandom, Flux Capacitors, and Timeless Adventures. And it's a book, and you get it right now, and it's just it's a must get. I'm ordering a couple for friends of mine that are into this. But without further ado, let me bring on Brad. Brad Gilmore, how are you?
Hey, man, I appreciate that introduction. I appreciate you checking out the book, man. I'm doing great.
Yeah, well, listen, very excited about it. For some reason, it doesn't get old. And maybe it's the concept, the concept keeps it fresh. But every little while, you get into huge conversations about Back to the Future. I'm thrilled that you did this. How long in the making has it been for you?
Well, for me, if I'm being honest, it's a lifetime in the making. But, I'd say last, 5 years, I had a different version of this book out before, but then I thought, man, there's so much more I can add to it. So I started doing a podcast for Back to the Future back in 2015, and that led me to talking to Crispin Glover, Leah Thompson, Christopher Lloyd, Bob Gale, Robert Zemeckis, a lot of people involved with it. I was even thankful to have Harry Waters Jr., who plays Marvin Berry in the film. He writes the introduction to the book. Saturday Night Live's Mikey Day writes the foreword to the book. And to me, it was several years in the making. But last year, I went to a Comic-Con here in Houston, and Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd were there. And although I had talked to Christopher Lloyd before, I never met the man in person and shook his hand. And there was something about that experience and seeing hundreds and hundreds of people lined up around the convention floor wanting to meet these guys. It made me go, man, everybody loves this movie. I love this movie. I want to put out that quintessential fans book of why we love Back to the Future.
Yeah, well, listen, well done and mission accomplished on it. And quite frankly, it's an important film too. I mean, not just because Spielberg and everybody who was involved with it, but it has so much to do with pop culture. It embraced pop culture. It was certainly a sign of the times, but also a sign of no pun intended, sign of the future of what was going on. And the fact that they made the three back to back to back is mind blowing if you think about it. But well thought out. And you wonder why more people don't do that. They certainly don't have the clout or the budget to do that. But how unique in your research did you find that is? Somebody that shot three films back to back to back.
So, it's a really great question. What's interesting is they shoot Back to the Future 1. There's no plan to do a sequel or make it a trilogy at all. The little ending tease where they fly off and they say, we got to go back to the future was just a joke and a way to end the movie. And so what was interesting, it became the #1 film of the year in 1985, 14 weeks straight, #1, highest grossing film. Michael J. Fox is the biggest movie star in the world. And then they say, look, we need to do sequel. We need to do a sequel to this movie. The people want it. So while Robert Zemeckis was doing Who Framed Roger Rabbit in '88 with Christopher Lloyd as well, he and Bob Gale started to put together an idea for a script where you would see Michael J. Fox's Marty McFly go back to the 1960s. And he would find out that Lorraine was a flower child, and he gets arrested for being a conscientious objector to the Vietnam War. And there's all kinds of craziness that happens in this original script for Back to the Future Part 2. But then Zemeckis called Bob Bob Gale and said, hey, what if we went back into the first movie? We have this unique idea or ability to go back into the first movie, see it from different angles, re-experience that first film, because that's what people want in a sequel. They want the same movie but different. And so they wrote this script called Paradox. Universal saw it and said, hey, there's too much here for one movie, but there's enough here for two movies. And that's when they made the decision to shoot 2 and 3 back to back.
Geez, just a one. Yeah, I didn't realize that, and you clarified me on that. But amazing, the history we don't see or that we don't know. Have any of the actors or the people behind the cameras, do any of them not like the film?
I haven't met anybody on this God's green earth, this known universe, or anywhere in the space-time continuum that doesn't love Back to the Future. Now, I know there's a comedic bit that Tom Wilson, who plays Biff Tannen, he does a joke song kind of about everybody asking him about Back to the Future all the time. Because the movie was so big and because it's transcended for 4 decades, it's been in the pop culture sphere and always relevant, always consistently present, always on cable, always on television, people always talking about it. So many of those people, really all of them, are most synonymous with Back to the Future. Robert Zemeckis is an incredible film director who went on to do Forrest Gump, and like I said, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Romancing the Stone, Castaway, here last year in theaters, which I got to interview him for. But people still think about him for Back to the Future. Christopher Lloyd was Jim Ignatowski. He played Professor Plum. He went on to do The Addams Family and so many different other things. He's still known as Doc Brown. Michael J. Fox is most known for Marty McFly, even though he did Teen Wolf, Spin City, and so many other things. Leah Thompson, the list goes on and on. Crispin Glover. This movie was so massive that they're all known for it. So I'm sure at times, at different points in their life, there's been some Back to the Future fatigue for them, but they still all realize how incredible of an experience this has been for them, and they all love the movie. So I haven't heard anybody ever say, I've never heard anybody say they don't love Back to the Future.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you 100%. I don't know how many times I've seen it, just over and over. What about the predictions? And people talk so much about that. They're pretty right on certain things, and some things are just pure luck. But how many of the predictions, futuristic predictions, stand out to you that have come through?
Well, there's a few, right? I mean, there's a, like they've predicted almost those Ray-Ban Meta glasses with the AI, voice command assistants like Alexa and Siri were present in Back to the Future Part 2, paying with things with your thumbprint, or now we use Face ID. Picture-in-picture, which people forget about, but Back to the Future invented picture-in-picture. There was no such thing before that, but we see young Marty watching several things at once. And of course, the Cubs, they were a year off. They were just a year off from the Cubs winning the World Series. So they were close.
That's the freak thing in that. That's the freak thing. The other things are real things that happen, but amazing. Absolutely amazing. Brad, tell us anything else we should know about the book. And, we want everybody to get it. And if you can, give us a website or a social media site where we could follow along with what you're doing in the book.
Yeah, you can follow me on all social media at Brad Gilmore. BackToTheFutureBook.com is where you can learn more about the book. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all your regular retailers. But it's about Back to the Future, the first movie. We talk about the sequels. We go into the theme park ride, the animated series, the musical, cut scenes from the film that may or may not have made the movie better, a whole conversation about a cut scene from Back to the Future Part 2. I talk about Doc Brown's inventions. We talk about the different versions of the time machine, my favorite friends in time. And I have collaborators along the way, including Jeffrey Weissman, who played George McFly in parts 2 and 3. We get to hear his story of getting recast when Crispin Glover didn't elect to do the sequels. There's so much information in here. And again, I've been able to compile quotes over these 10 years of doing Back to the Future, the podcast, who give me insight. People from Bob Gale and Christopher Lloyd and Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, just the insight that they gave me, I was able to adapt to this book. And so we talk about all things Back to the Future and why we love Back to the Future.
Brad Gilmore, congrats on everything, certainly the book, and we're going to be talking about it as we let you go. Thanks for being here.
Appreciate it, Frank.
Brad Gilmore, one and only Brad Gilmore, and does so many things well. Everyone.
Hey, Brad. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, I appreciate it.
So, greetings, fellow nerd.
Yeah, absolutely. Big time.
Why Back to the Future? What got you so interested in this movie? Because you're obviously too young to have grown up with it like I did.
You know, it's a great question because back in the day, I saw it on television one time, and something about it just spoke to me. And I'm the youngest of four siblings from my father. My dad's in his 80s, and my eldest brother's 23 years older than me. And so I always kind of looked for ways to relate to them, I think. And Back to the Future is a movie that I have found over these 4 decades since its release that everybody has seen or at least heard about if you haven't seen it. And it's always a great conversation piece. And to me, it's the 3 movies together. They're the best trilogy ever made. Best pure trilogy ever made. I stand on it. I will debate it till the cows come home, as they say. This is the best film trilogy of all time. And Back to the Future is on a short list of perfect movies.
So I might have to argue with you on that.
Go for it.
When you've got Star Wars, when you've got Indiana Jones.
Hold on now. See, look, Scott, I like you, but you're already wrong. Here's the issue. Pure trilogy. Look, the original Star Wars trilogy, yes, but then there's been movies added on to that. We had the
they ruined it. Absolutely ruined it.
We had the Skywalker saga, which is 9 films by itself. Indiana Jones, there's 5 of them. That's not a trilogy. That's 5 movies.
Yeah, but really, after the first 3, they're also really bad. Although the 5th Indiana Jones wasn't horrible.
So I actually have a fondness for all Indiana Jones, with Last Crusade being the best of the 5, in my opinion. Then it's Raiders. Temple of Doom. Oh, you're going to not like me. I feel like I'm really appreciative, but Temple of Doom is my least favorite of the 5.
No, I would agree with that.
Okay, cool. So we're on the same wavelength. So, but to me, it's a pure trilogy. There's been no TV adaptation, Netflix limited series, reboot, remake. The closest thing we got was a Saturday morning animated cartoon or the Back to the Future musical.
And it really, it's held up over time. There are obviously things that they portray in the future that we have not seen, but very close. We don't necessarily have hoverboards, but we've got self-driving scooters on every street corner in every major city now. So that's fairly close.
They did some things. They invented with the Ray-Ban Meta glasses that they have now, virtual assistants, AI, Siri, Alexa, those were all in Back to the Future, picture-in-picture, and then they were a year off from the Chicago Cubs winning the World Series. We pay for things with our thumbprint. They got a lot right, and what I love most about their depiction of the future is it wasn't some dystopian, war-torn country that we lived in. It was just like, hey, this is probably what's going to happen in 30 years, and we don't get flying cars, but we get some cool things.
We've got Brad Gilmore here on the Scott Sand Show. His latest project, his book, Why We Love Back to the Future, 40 Years of Fandom, Flux Capacitors, and Timeless Adventures. You get into some fan theories. What's your favorite fan theory without revealing too much?
Well, to me, what I love most about this movie and why the podcast has continued for so many years is there's so many little things you can debate in small threads, but there's a cut scene from Back to the Future Part 2 where you see Biff Tannen, old Biff from Back to the Future Part 2. He hijacks the DeLorean. He comes back and we see him sweating and he looks like he's really in rough shape. And then that's where it cuts off in the movie. There's a cut scene where he actually disappears. Right? When he's laying there on the car, he disappears completely, erased from existence. And we get into the reasons why. And we also talk a lot about, was that a good idea to cut the scene? Was it not a good idea to cut the scene? And I throw out a few of my own ideas of what could have happened to Biff.
Back to the Future could have been so different and probably not as successful if changes had not been made during the production. Can you imagine Eric Stoltz as Marty McFly instead of Michael J. Fox? I don't think it works. And I like Eric Stoltz. He's done some great movies and great TV shows. And the DeLorean, what a classic decision to make that the time machine. The movie could have turned out completely different were it not for a few minor changes.
Well, the movie would have had Eric Stoltz as Marty McFly getting into his time-traveling refrigerator and trying to get to a nuclear test site in order to get back to the future. Wouldn't have really been the movie that we know it today. And I think Michael J. Fox, as Marty McFly, he's up there as the coolest character of all time. It's him. It's Indiana Jones, like we talked about, James Bond. There might be a few others of just pure coolness on screen. The man invented rock and roll and skateboarding. Come on now. He's one of the greats of all time. And I think Michael J. Fox, he understood how to balance the craziness of the plot with the humor. You never felt like it got dark. And with Eric Stoltz, by all reports in the footage that I've seen, is it felt dark. He was playing it as if his mother was actually coming on to him, as if he was actually stuck in the 1950s with no conceivable way of how to get back to the future. He played it real, which I understand he's a great actor, but that's not the sensibility they were looking for in Back to the Future. They wanted some more jokes. They wanted some levity. That's what Michael J. brought.
And the casting of Doc Brown, certainly iconic as well.
Yeah, Christopher Lloyd, to me, obviously as Doc Brown, is one of those, everyone knows Great Scott. Everyone knows what a gigawatt is, even though that's the incorrect pronunciation of it. It's gigawatt, but he says gigawatt, so I say gigawatt, okay?
Sure.
And look, Chris Lloyd has done so much in his career. He was Jim Ignatowski on Taxi, one of the biggest shows of all time. He went on to do The Addams Family. He went on to do Clue the movie later that year in 1985, which I'm actually very fond of. He playing both a doctor and a professor in the same year, might I add. But he is most known for Back to the Future, as is everybody. And his performance as Doc Brown is second to none, man. It's second to none. And that's what I think also stands out about this film. Everybody brings it. Everybody's throwing 97 down the middle when their performances, especially in Back to the Future Part 1.
So, Brad, if you could hop into the DeLorean and visit any moment from the Back to the Future trilogy, what scene would you want to visit in person?
So the scene I would like to see in person is one of my favorite of the film, and I never hear anybody say it's their favorite, but it is mine because it makes me laugh every time, even though I know the joke is going to happen. They're there at the Baines residence in 1955. Calvin Klein is sitting at the dinner table along with his mother, Lorraine Baines, and she grabs him by the leg, and then he runs out of the house because he's so nervous that his mother has the hots for him, to use my Michael J. Fox impression. And his future grandfather says, he's an idiot. It comes from upbringing. His parents are probably idiots too. And you know what? I just want to see that in person because it's my favorite line of the movie because it makes me laugh. So if I could be the fly on the wall in that conversation, I would. Now, the second scene I would say is in Back to the Future Part 3 when they find the DeLorean in the Delgado mines, the old DeLorean that Doc Brown from 1885 buried it there for them to discover in 1955. I would like to be along for that Jules Vernean adventure.
All right, I know we're almost out of time, but we've got to give some love, some credit to Lorraine, to Leah Thompson, who, as someone my age, we all fell in love with Leah Thompson in the late 80s.
I still am in love with Leah Thompson. I don't think that love has ever left for me. I had the privilege of interviewing her one time years back, and she called me a dreamboat, and I don't think that I've come down off that high since. But she was miraculous in this film because she had to play that old version of Lorraine that we see at the very beginning, the 1985 version, where she got the bottle of vodka and she's sad. And it looks like a woman who best years were behind her and not looking forward to tomorrow, but knowing that she still has to live it. And you saw the sadness in Leah Thompson's face in that scene in 1985. I think that her acting is phenomenal as that version of Lorraine. And then when she's younger, you understand and even though it's weird, you understand why Marty is kind of flattered that this very attractive young woman, even though it's his mother, like has this crush on him. It's a strange thing to get down, yeah. but you understand because she is so breathtakingly gorgeous, still is. But in this movie, you understand why everyone was chasing after Lorraine.
Brad Gilmore, why we love Back to the Future, 40 years of fandom, flux capacitors, and timeless adventures. Where else can we find you on social media, your podcast, all those things?
Yeah, you can find Back to the Future, the podcast, wherever you get podcasts. This book, Why We Love Back to the Future, backtothefuturebook.com, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all those good places. You can find me on all social media at Brad Gilmore.
I could nerd out with you for hours, man. Brad, it's nice to meet you. Thanks for coming on.
Let's do it again sometime, Scott.
Hello, Mr. Gilmore. Good morning.
Hey, how's it going, Jose?
Why we love Back to the Future, 40 years of fandom, flux capacitors, and timeless adventures. I mean, this movie does not get old. One of the few movies not to have been remade in the 2000s because of its just classic period piece theme. Why are people still in love with this movie?
Man, it's generational, Jose. It's one of those movies that you can watch with your eldest family member or youngest family member, and you have the same enjoyment out of it every single time. And the thing is, the concept, the heart of this movie, the way that it came about was Bob Gale had this idea. What happened? He found his father's yearbook, and he said, what would happen if I went to school with my dad? Like, would we have been friends? Would we have liked each other? Like, if my parents and I were the same age, how would that be? And that was the question that was asked. And you know what? They turned it into what I consider the greatest film trilogy of all time. And time travel, everyone has a fascination with, especially during this period, going back forward. And the DeLorean is just cool as all hell. So there's so many reasons why people still love this movie and love all these movies so many years later.
And I mean, a lot of things had to fall into place because what people don't realize was Michael J. Fox was not the original star character. So
He was
a lot
not.
of things had to really fall in place.
Yes, so much had to fall in place. Originally, they cast Eric Stoltz, who's a fine actor. They shot with him, Jose, for 8 weeks. They got to the point of the movie where it was like, hey, we're wrapping up. What else you got up next? What are you doing? What are you working on? They thought they were all done and planning their next move. And then one night, Steven Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, Bob Gale, co-creator of Back to the Future, they all assembled on the Universal lot and said, look, we're going to have to let Eric go because we're not getting the jokes that we want. The movie's not hitting in the same way that we want it to. And they made the decision to go back to Michael J. Fox, ask Gary Goldberg, who's the producer of Family Ties, which Michael J. Fox was the star on at the time as Alex P. Keaton. They asked him, hey, can we get Michael? And they said yes, so long as he still puts Family Ties first. So Michael J. Fox was filming Family Ties in the day, shooting Back to the Future at night, and in July 3rd, 1985, when audiences first flocked to see this time travel story in theaters, Michael J. Fox had the #1 movie and #1 television show in the country.
No, and then I was watching this great YouTube video on the psychology, saying that like the 2000s to 2010s and even now have been all really a big blur. But this movie came out 40 years ago, and it stood the test of time. It's a movie in the 80s, but about the 50s. What is it about the 50s that people love and can still go back to, like, you know, maybe a quieter time?
Well, it was a quieter time, but it was also the rise of the teenager. Before then, you know, there wasn't really the characterization of teenager as we know it, and they hit on it in the movie where you go where they're all at Lou's Cafe and they're hanging out after school, and their rock and roll started to come in the mid-50s. Elvis and Chuck Berry a little bit before Elvis, but Elvis put out That's All Right in 1954, and we really started getting going, and skateboarding and all these things started in this 1950s. So that was kind of where teenagers began. And to me, everyone can relate to being the guy who wants to ask out the hottest girl in school and can't do it, doesn't have the courage to. And then it's great that Marty kind of gives his dad the talk that a dad would give to a son in order to go and get Lorraine and ask her to the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. There's those universal themes. And then you just add this fantastical element of time travel, which everyone has thought about. Hey, if I could go back and do this, or if I could live to see 200 years into the future, I wonder what would happen. There's that universal themes and these fantastical elements, which has just kept this movie so much in the pop culture conversation.
Now, what would be your argument for not making a remake of this movie?
So I actually don't have an argument to not remake the movie. I'm one of the few Back to the Future loyalists who say, hey, look, I'm up for, as long as the Bobs are involved, that's Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis, the creators of Back to the Future, as long as they're involved in some capacity, I'm all for it because I know they would steward the franchise in a positive direction. But like, if it's great, like for instance, I saw the Ghostbusters movie Answer the Call, the one that had the all-female cast, and I was excited for a new Ghostbusters movie, and I went and saw it, and I didn't really like it. It had nothing to do with the cast being all-female. I just didn't connect with the movie as much. And I thought, man, that sucks. I've been waiting so long for a great Ghostbusters movie, and this one just didn't hit the mark for me. But then I found out, Jose, that it didn't tamper my love at all for the original 2 Ghostbusters movies. It was then that I said, you know what? I'd be open to a new Back to the Future. If it's great, amazing. I have more Back to the Future in my life that I can dissect and talk about. If it's not great, I still have the original trilogy, which is perfect as it is.
Wow. So what can people expect out of this book? I mean, I know you can't share too many nuggets, but what should people expect from this book?
So, look, it's not just about the making of Back to the Future and its sequels. I mean, we definitely do that, but this book has several different layers to it. We talk about the making of the movies and the casting. We talk about the musical, which just started a few years ago. We talk about the animated series, the theme park attraction, the Back to the Future video game, the comic book series that came out. We dive into fan theories. We talk about Doc Brown's greatest inventions, what the future of Hill Valley might look like. So it's all compiled into this book. And, I've had the privilege of talking to Christopher Lloyd, Bob Gale, Bob Zemeckis, Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, Jeffrey Weissman, Mikey Day from Saturday Night Live actually writes the foreword to the book. But I've talked to all these people over the years on my podcast about Back to the Future, and they've given me so much great nuggets and insight of information that I wanted to compile them in some kind of way. And that's what people can expect in why we love Back to the Future.
If you were to go back to the future to your younger days, what would you change about yourself or the advice you would give yourself right now?
You know what? The advice that I would give myself is just stay calm. Everything happens well when you just stay calm. Don't overreact. Don't underreact. Just stay level and everything's going to be all right. But I'm one of those guys who I start thinking about the butterfly effect. And if I go back, I don't want to change anything because you know what? We've all taken some lumps, some cuts, some bruises, but everything we're not makes us everything we are. So I wouldn't change a thing, but I would love to go into the future and see what it looks like. I just want to be an observer, fly on the wall. I don't want to cause any paradoxes or interrupt the space-time continuum, Jose, but I would love to see what the world looks like in 100 years.
Brad Gilmore, thank you so much for your time. Why we love Back to the Future, 40 years of fandom, flux capacitors, and timeless adventures. Thank you so much for your time.
Hey, appreciate you, Jose.
Gilmore.
Hey, guys, how y'all doing?
Hey, Brad, why do we love Back to the Future so much?
Because it's the greatest movie ever made. It's the greatest trilogy ever made. It's a generational story that has stood the test of time and continues to find new audiences year after year.
I know, isn't that crazy?
It's so true.
Yeah, I saw this, and I see you have it's a book, right? A new book out?
Yeah, Why We Love Back to the Future, 40 years of fandom, flux capacitors, and timeless adventures.
40 years. Is that correct? Why? And hey, Tom, why are you making me feel old? Man, that was my childhood right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's everybody's childhood, and I think it continues to be everybody's childhood. When somebody finds this movie for the first time, there's something about it that's just generational, and it doesn't matter that it's a movie that came out 40 years ago. And when I watched it a few years ago, my nephews, who were, they were, I don't know, maybe 8 and 9 at the time, it was like it was a brand new movie. It didn't feel dated. It didn't feel old. It didn't feel like a 40-year-old movie. It felt something fresh, and it has these themes that everybody can relate to. Have you ever thought about, what would it be like to go to high school with your parents? That's a strange concept to think about, and I think that's part of the appeal. You add these universal themes with the fantastical elements and a cool car that can travel through time, your movie will forever be relevant.
Brad, why did they come out with Back to the Future 3? I think they were good when they were done 2.
Oh, well, hold on now. It's now, look, I'm from the great state of Texas where we love a good Western, okay? And to me, Back to the Future 3, I love Back to the Future 3. It's one of my, it sometimes is my favorite of the trilogy. And you know who else's favorite it is? And the quote is in the book. Christopher Lloyd, his favorite is Back to the Future Part 3. What do you have to say about that?
No way.
Wow.
Everybody knows that 2 was the best. Come on.
2?
Everybody knows that 2, 2, obviously the original, but everybody knows that 2 is the best. Come on.
Look, 2 is great, but that's what's great about this trilogy. It's the greatest movie trilogy of all time, best pure trilogy of all time. And for me personally, sometimes 2 is my favorite. Sometimes it's 1, sometimes it's 3. And the stories are so close and they're so intertwined. I can't watch Back to the Future and not immediately want to see Back to the Future 2 and Back to the Future 3. I spent a lot of hours watching Back to the Future, I guess is what I'm saying. But all of them are interchangeable and they can be your favorite at any given moment.
You've also been a host of the Back to the Future podcast. Is that true?
Yeah, man. So this is where it all started. Back in 2015, this was the year that we finally made it to the future. I was looking around. I'm like, hey, there's got to be a podcast about Back to the Future. There's a podcast about everything. There's a podcast about like which are the best seedless watermelons. There's got to be one about Back to the Future. And so I was looking around and I didn't find one. So I said, you know what? I might as well start it. And that led me to talking to Crispin Glover, Leah Thompson, Christopher Lloyd, Bob Gale, Robert Zemeckis. The list goes on and on of the people I've been able to interact with from the Back to the Future world because of the podcast. And it was those stories that I heard from all these cast members and creators that made me go, wow, this information should be compiled in some sort of literary project that can last the test of time in the same way as the movie did. And that's where the book came from.
Man, so how did you really watch the movies real up close over again and kind of just analyze and talk about them and all that? Is that how you kind of got going on the podcast?
Yeah, it was just like, hey, I just want to have more conversations with people who love this movie as much as I did, and thankfully, so many people were receptive and have actually made contributions to this very book. Harry Waters Jr., who plays Marvin Berry from the movie, who sings Earth Angel that we all tried to sing to our high school sweethearts as well. He actually writes the introduction to the book. Saturday Night Live's Mikey Day writes the foreword to the book, and Jeffrey Weissman, who took over the role of George McFly, he writes a section about his experience with Back to the Future. And it really is, it's a love letter. It's a love letter. That's why it's called Why We Love Back to the Future, because I've never met somebody who goes, oh, Back to the Future? That movie sucks. No, everybody loves this movie. Right. And there's something about it that you just cannot find a flaw in.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. It's one of our faves, of course. Also, you've been an announcer for WWE Hall of Famer Booker T's Reality of Wrestling promotion in Texas. So that's awesome, working with Booker T. We're big WWE fans as well.
Yeah, no, Book's the best, man. I've worked with Booker now since 2012, and he's actually one of my closest friends. I probably talk to Booker more on the phone than anybody, even my own mother, on a daily basis. And we've been able to grow reality wrestling. We have our ESPN radio show, which is called the Hall of Fame, where we talk about pro wrestling, combat sports, boxing. And you know what? Booker T is a big Back to the Future fan. He's a big Back to the Future fan as well. I think that he might like the Beverly Hills Cop series of movies a little bit more, but he loves Back to the Future. So we can always talk some great 80s movies together.
Well, if people want to check you and Booker out, how can they do that?
You can find our Reality Wrestling YouTube channel, the Hall of Fame podcast, where we, talk about pro wrestling every single week. You can check that out and really give our show a test. That Reality of Wrestling promotion we have down here in Houston. It's the first promotion to ever be giving a WWE official designation as one of the premier schools in the entire world if you want to get to the next level. So that's right here in Houston, Texas, and Booker and I are very proud of that.
Isn't that awesome how mainstream sports like ESPN and other big sports entities, Fox Sports, etc., how they kind of accepted wrestling now? Finally, after all these years, it was always like, oh, wrestling is that's more entertainment. That's not real sports. But now all of a sudden, WWE and professional wrestling is everywhere. Isn't that awesome how the ESPNs and all have accepted professional wrestling?
It is incredible. And, I've always been a wrestling fan since the age of 5 years old when I first saw Stone Cold Steve Austin. What? Give me a hell yeah. When I first saw him, he was the guy. And then now to actually just this past April, I was there in Las Vegas, Nevada at WrestleMania doing a live national radio show for ESPN with Booker T talking about wrestling for hours on end and taking callers from around the globe to talk about the thing that we all love. We all love pro wrestling and we all love Back to the Future. These are the two universal truths in life.
How do you feel about John Cena?
You know what? I love that he did 17. I love that he did the heel turn. I think that, look, if this is his last run, everyone always wanted to see it, so we're getting to see it. I don't know how long it's going to last, but to see him and Randy Orton lock horns one more time for the world title is going to be very nostalgic for me. They're at Backlash in St. Louis, so we're gonna see. And I think that Cody's run needed to come to an end. I think Cena was the best person to do it. I don't, Travis Scott, who was kind of involved in that main event for WrestleMania. He's actually, The Rock announced this on Pat McAfee, so I don't mind saying it. He's doing stuff with us at Reality of Wrestling in a training capacity. or coming up. So, look, there's a lot of cool things going on in the world of wrestling, but I love John Cena. He's one of the greatest of all time. So I hope that he feels satisfied at the end of this year.
Brad Gilmore, Why We Love Back to the Future, 40 Years of Fandom, Flux Capacitors, Timeless Adventures. Again, if people want to pick the book up, how can they do that?
You can get it wherever books are sold. Amazon's always the easiest place, backtothefuturebook.com. You can find them wherever, man.
Brad, thank you so much for checking in, my friend. It's been a fun interview, and looking forward to checking the book out. We love Back to the Future, and looking forward to, hearing you talk some wrestling.
Hey, man, anytime you want me to talk a little pro wrestling, you just give me a call now.
Hey, what's your social media real quick?
At Brad Gilmore everywhere, BradGilmore. You can find me on every social app there.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for checking in.
Hey, take care, guys.
I'll tell you what exists. The excitement for Back to the Future. The 40th anniversary of this fabulous film is this July. It was released and initially set in the year 1985. I saw it in its original run. Thank you very much. The film follows protagonist Marty McFly, who attempts to return to his hometown after accidentally traveling back to the year 1955. It didn't seem that far away back then. He's in a DeLorean. I've actually been in a DeLorean. See how I'm excited about this film. It's regarded as one of the greatest films ever made to this day. Joining us to tell us more about it and his new book, Why We Love Back to the Future, is Houston area writer, TV host, and radio personality Brad Gilmore. Brad, welcome to Hello Houston. Thank you for dressing up. You look fabulous.
Oh, you know what? I even have DeLoreans on my tie here. I wanted to make sure I went all the way. I really appreciate the invitation. I love talking about Back to the Future and why we all love it.
A lot of people don't know that Eric Stoltz was first choice for the lead.
Not only was he first choice, Eric Stoltz was cast to be Marty McFly. They shot on the movie for 7 to 8 weeks. They were getting to the point of the film where they were wrapping up and they were talking about what their next project was. And then Robert Zemeckis, the director of the movie, showed some of the dailies to Steven Spielberg. And Spielberg goes, you're just not getting the laughs that you want. And they made a crazy decision to recast their main lead in the movie 8 weeks into production. And they had to fire Stoltz and hire Michael J. Fox.
Well, I read, before we get off of that Stoltz looked at this movie as more of a serious throwback to the past, and that's why that Spielberg was like, he's too serious.
Well, he was playing it as if it were really happening, and if you went, all due respect, Eric Stoltz, great actor, but he had people call him Marty. He was very method on the set. You refer to him always as Marty. And but you know what? If you went back in time and you were stuck there and your mom started to come on to you a little bit, you might be playing it really serious too, instead of the jokes that Michael J. Fox did it with.
But when did you start to really love, Back to the Future? That's pretty niche in that you saw the movie, how you look kind of young.
What's the hook?
Yeah, like when did you get into this movie?
So I got in the movie real young. I saw it on television one time, and it just captured my imagination. I'm the youngest of 4, and my oldest brother and I are 23 years apart. So we don't have a lot in common, culturally speaking, right, over the times that we grew up. But Back to the Future was something we bonded with. My dad is in his 80s. He grew up in the 50s. So for me, it was almost a connection to my family in a lot of ways, which I think is where this movie first came to be. Bob Gale, the writer of Back to the Future, co-creator, found his dad's yearbook and said, oh, wow, I didn't know that my dad was the president of his graduating class. I would have never had anything to do with the president of my graduating class, and they went to the same high school. So we thought, I wonder what would happen if I went to high school with my parents. Would we be friends or not? And that was the germ of the idea that birthed Back to the Future, the franchise, and kind of, the family element has always been something that stuck with me.
That's amazing because this is your second book about Back to the Future. How did you do 2 books on Back to the Future? Yeah. How much content can you really have, Brad?
Well, look, I went all the way back to the past, future, present, all through the space-time continuum. Well, what's great about these movies is they continue to find an audience, and there continue to be spin-off projects around it. There was a musical that launched in 2020, actually right before the pandemic, in the West End in London, and then it's transferred over here to the United States. I got to see it on Broadway back in 2023. It's coming to Houston, I believe, this summer. And there's an animated series. There's a ride. There's a comic book. There's a video game. There's so much about Back to the Future that you can really dive into. And that's what I wanted to do with this one. Coming up on this 40th anniversary, I wanted to really get into why we actually love this movie and what connects us to it.
And so I guess, for you were mentioning how it really ties back to your family and your roots and that connection it brought to you. Why do you think it's still such a cultural phenomenon across the board?
Quentin Tarantino regarded it as a perfect movie.
And I think when people see the film, it's hard to find a flaw in it. And I think it explores themes that we're all curious by, not only the family factor, but a time machine. Who hasn't thought about if I could only go back and change this? Yeah. And that's what the film hits on. Crispin Glover's character, George McFly, if I would have stood up to the bully, would my life have been different? Well, it turns out that if you do stand up for yourself, maybe your life turns out different. I think those themes of time travel and just wondering what would have been is what makes people keep coming back to it.
Well, clearly it's dated. But I don't think it's one of those movies. Well, I'm dated too.
Your opinion.
Relax, Brad.
Your opinion.
So, well, I mean, I don't think it's one of those movies that can be remade in 2030 to go back to 1990. You know what I'm saying? Do you? But you're the expert.
So, yeah, I mean, if Back to the Future were to be set in the past today, it would be 1995, which doesn't really feel like that long ago.
Right? That's blasphemy.
But for me, yeah, the Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis, who created this franchise, they actually said over their dead bodies, will there ever be another Back to the Future movie or series? I think you could do it. You could do it, but should you? Should you? That's the question. Could you?
How would you even cast it?
Yeah.
I mean, there's just no. Michael J. Fox was so.
He's
fabulous.
iconic. Yeah,
he was so wonderful.
Makes that. Well, we do have a question from our YouTube comments. My British computer guy says, I want to know which is his favorite of the movies.
There were 3, right?
There's 3 Back to the Futures, right? Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3, obviously. For me, and I don't know if it's just because I'm from Texas and something about Westerns are just embedded in our DNA, but I actually love Back to the Future 3 the most, which is actually an opinion not held by many fans.
It's a very unpopular opinion.
It's the most unpopular of the 3, but you know who shares it with me? It's Christopher Lloyd. When I talked to Christopher Lloyd, who plays Doc Brown in the films, he said Part 3 was his favorite as well. So that's mine. But you know what? It changes every day. It's like asking me what my favorite food is. Like some days it's Mexican, some days it's sushi. But I love all the food. I love all the Back to the Future.
If somebody is actually listening that hasn't seen this movie.
Okay.
Congratulations.
I haven't seen
it. You haven't seen this movie? You're in for a big treat.
That.
I wouldn't see it with Brad. He'll tell you everything that's about to happen.
By the way, my British computer guy says no to your movie 3.
Then he's not my British computer guy.
Okay, how are you? What's your elevator pitch? Why should Celeste see this movie tonight?
Why should you see it tonight? Because it hits on all the universal themes. It's time travel. It's fantasy. It's sci-fi. It's romance. It is perfectly cast, perfectly directed, perfectly executed and written. And to me, it is not only the greatest film of the 80s, it's the greatest trilogy of all time, and it is on the Mount Rushmore of greatest films ever made.
So should I watch it, 1, 2, and 3, or is it
if you
a
want to
Star
do it
Wars
properly,
kind of thing?
if you want to do it the right
3,
way, you watch them all in one night, so you can go on that cinematic space-time travel ride. But to me, what's great about these movies is I can pick them up wherever they are. Once you know the film, you can watch it like wherever it is in the movie.
I'm guessing they've redone the quality so that it looks like it was shot yesterday.
Yeah. But what's only interesting about that is, so the quality's gotten so good, you can see a little bit of the old age makeup like on their necks and a little bit where the wrinkles are because it's so good. But yeah, I mean, it to me though, it just still feels fresh, even though it was 40 years ago.
Have you ever ridden in a DeLorean?
I have.
I have too.
Have
you?
No, I've never even seen the movie.
She would be like, "What's a DeLorean?" I'm not sure.
I would be like, "Oh, look at that car." So my British computer guy, by the way, says 2 all the way. So
2 is great. So here's what's interesting too: is Back to the Future 2 is where they actually go to the future, and the future was 2015. And when you look at it now, you say, okay, we don't have flying cars or hoverboards, but they did get a lot of things right. Picture in picture, paying with things with your thumbprint or your Face ID, Google Glasses. There's like a lot of small little things.
And the black janitor becoming the mayor.
That
was the first social statement this really made.
Yeah, he becomes mayor. Mayor Goldie Wilson.
So if somebody wants to have a conversation about this with you, where can they find out some more info?
You can follow me on all social media at Brad Gilmore, backtothefuturebook.com. Get it wherever you can. Listen to the podcast. We'll talk Back to the Future all day long.
Brad Gilmore.